Morning, everyone. Just going to wish everyone a good morning. And we will begin. Seems my many reliable panelists have not arrived as yet, and I'm not sure they will. So I must press on my own, which I will do. And could it be that I failed to send this? Okay. Okay. Apparently I failed to send the notice for the session, and that is my mistake. That was a silly mistake. And so now I have just sent it. So maybe some folks will start to arrive, but we will begin in any case with the YouTube audience. Let's see. Yeah, that went out fine. So, okay. Hi, Nancy. I'm sorry I forgot to push the send button on the MailChimp, so the notice went out late. But here we are. And so we will make do with what we can. And good morning, Art and Mila. Nice to see you this morning. You're all welcome to join me in the panel if you wish. So we're working our way through the Red Book. I would say we're about, we've completed this side. So I would say we're about 40% complete on the Red Book. And so there's a long way to go. And then we have the Black Books to follow on with that. And hello, Megan. Nice to see you from San Francisco. I'm coming out that way to San Jose tomorrow. And so I will be in California next week. I won't have access to my computer, but I will have my cell phone. And we're doing the organizational work for Confluence 23, which is going to be in October, 13 to 16 of October. And we're going to finalize the title, which has caused some controversy. And we're going to kind of finalize the things that we hope to do at the Confluence. So it's going to be an exciting week for me. There will be no advanced reading group this week on Wednesday because several of us will be in California in that meeting. And I won't be here to start the advanced reading group session or lead it. And Tim will be with me, so he won't be able to do that. So that's the situation. We will have a session, an advanced reading group session, a week from Wednesday, however. And we will have a Red Book session, this session, again next week. I'll be back from California by then. And I come back on Saturday. And so we will continue on as usual with the Red Book reading. So we are on chapter 11. And I'll just read a couple of footnotes just to set the context for you. Chapter 11 is entitled Resolution. And he's setting the scene. He depicts a scene in the fantasy that follows. And this fantasy occurred on Christmas Day, 1913. Christmas Day, 1913, so 110 years ago. And here's what he said about it in his 1925 seminar. Jung said, "A few evenings later, I felt that things should continue. So again, I tried to follow the same procedure, but it would not descend. I remained on the surface. Then I realized that I had a conflict in myself about going down, but I could not make out what it was. I only felt that two dark principles." Good evening, or good morning, Janetta, welcome. Let's see. So I realized there was a conflict in myself about going down, but I could not make out what it was. I only felt that two dark principles were fighting each other, two serpents. He then recounted the fantasy that ensued. And this account, which is in the seminar of 1925, it's in a book called Introduction to Jungian Psychology, page 104. So I will begin with paragraph 206, and my fellow panelists who wish to be seen can show themselves by showing their video or be heard by unmuting themselves. But if they do not do that, they will not be seen on YouTube. So welcome, everyone. Chapter 11, Resolution, paragraph 206. On the third night, deep longing to continue experiencing the mysteries seized me. The struggle between doubt and desire was great in me, but suddenly I saw that I stood before a steep ridge in a wasteland. It is a dazzling bright day. I catch sight of the prophet high above me. His hand makes an averting movement, and I abandon my decision to climb up. I wait below, gazing upward. I look. To the right is dark night, and to the left it is bright day. The rock separates day and night. On the dark side lies a big black serpent. On the bright side, a white serpent. They thrust their heads toward each other, eager for battle. Elijah stands on the heights above them. The serpents pounce on one another, and a terrible wrestling ensues. The black serpent seems to be stronger. The white serpent draws back. Great billows of dust rise from the place of struggle. But then I see the black serpent pulls itself back again. The front part of its body has become white. Both serpents curl about themselves, one in light and the other in darkness. Elijah, what did you see? I saw the fight of two formidable serpents. It seemed to me as if the black would overcome the white serpent, but behold, the black one withdrew, and its head and the top part of its body had turned white. Elijah, do you understand that? I have thought it over, but I cannot understand it. Should it mean that the power of the good light will become so great that even the darkness that resists it will be illumined by it? Elijah climbs before me into the heights. To a very high summit, I follow. On the peak, we come to some masonry made of huge blocks. It is a round embankment on the summit. Inside lies a large courtyard, and there is a mighty boulder in the middle, like an altar. The prophet stands on this stone and says, "This is the temple of the sun. This place is a vessel that collects the light of the sun." Elijah climbs down from the stone His form becomes smaller and descending, and finally becomes dwarf-like, unlike himself. I ask, "Who are you?" And the answer is, "I am Mime, and I will show you the wellspring." The collected light becomes water and flows in many springs from the summit into the valleys of the earth. He then dives down into a crevice. I follow him down into a dark cave. I hear the rippling of a spring. I hear the voice of the dwarf-like from below. Here are my wells. Whoever drinks from them becomes wise. But I cannot reach down. I lose courage. I leave the cave and, doubting, pace back and forth in the square of the yard. Everything appears to me strange and incomprehensible. It is solitary and deathly silent here. The air is clear and cool, as on the remotest heights. A wonderful flood of sunlight all around. The great wall surrounds me. A serpent crawls over the stone. It is the serpent of the prophet. How did it come out of the underworld into the world above? I follow it and see how it crawls into the wall. I feel weird all over. A little house stands there with a portico, minuscule, snuggling against the rock. The serpents become infinitely small. I feel as if I, too, am shrinking. The walls enlarge into a huge mountain, and I see that I am below, on the foundation of the crater in the underworld. And I stand before the house of the prophet. He steps out of the door of his house. I notice, Elijah, that you have shown me and let me experience all sorts of strange things and allowed me to come before you today. But I confess that it is all dark to me. Your world appears to me today in a new light. Just now, it was as if I were separated by a starry distance from your place, which I still wanted to reach today. But behold, it seems to be one and the same place. Elijah, you wanted to come here far too much. I did not deceive you. You deceived yourself. He sees badly who wants to see. You have overreached yourself. It is true. I eagerly long to reach you, to hear more. Salome startled me and led me into bewilderment. I felt dizzy because what she said seemed to me to be momentous and like madness. Where is Salome? Elijah, how impetuous you are. What is up with you? Step over to the crystal and prepare yourself in its light. Okay, there's a break in the text at this point, and so I will stop at that point. I want to read you a couple more footnotes and then discuss this. In the 1925 seminar, Jung added, I thought, this is a druidic sacred place. And then another footnote, in Wagner's Ring of the Nibelung dwarf mime is the brother of Alberich and a master craftsman. Alberich stole the Rheingold from the Rhine maidens. Through renouncing love, he was able to forge a ring out of that conferred limitless power. In Siegfried, Mime, who lives in a cave, brings up Siegfried so that he will kill kill Fafnir, the giant, who was transformed into a dragon and now has the ring. Siegfried slays Fafnir with the invincible sword that Mime has fashioned and kills Mime, who had intended to kill him. after he had recovered the ring. And there's one more footnote here on the next page. I'm on page 196 of the Reader's Edition. In the 1925 seminar, Jung interpreted this episode as follows, quote, "The fight of the two snakes, the white means a movement into the day and the black into the kingdom of darkness, with moral aspects too. There was a real conflict in me, a resistance to going down. My stronger tendency was to go up, because I had been so impressed the day before with the cruelty of the place I had seen. I really had a tendency to find a way to the conscious by going up, as I did on the mountain. Elijah said that it was just the same below as or above. Compare Dante's Inferno. The Gnostics expressed the same idea in the symbol of the reversed cones. Thus, the mountain and the crater are similar. There was nothing of conscious structure in these fantasies. They were just events that happened. So I assumed that Dante got his ideas from the same archetype." And again, this is from an Introduction to Jungian Psychology, page 104 and 105. McGuire suggests that Jung is referring to Dante's conception of the central form of the cavity of hell, which with its circles mirroring in reverse the form of heaven with its spheres. In Ion, Jung also noted that serpents were a typical pair of opposites, and that the conflict between the serpents was a motif found in medieval alchemy. And that's from Collected Works 9-2, paragraph 181. Okay, so that's from Ion. All right. So I've just read that section, and I have another friend joining me in the panel. I hope she'll have something to say with me, and if not, I will comment myself. Okay, so the thing that I see in this, obviously this is very metaphorical for things that happen. And, I have to say that in our current events, we're seeing this same thing emerge. And, regardless of which side you prefer in our current events, you'll see one side is light and the other side is dark. And what happens here in this fantasy is that the black snake starts to turn white in the battle between the two. And I would say that also the white snake also starts to become dark, because we have to have a dark side in order to have any substance in life. And so it's both things. Here he's only describing the dark snake becoming white, but he isn't here talking about the white snake becoming dark until they really become the same thing and they become one. And the idea is that we become one at the top. And this is the idea of the caduceus, which is the symbol of medicine, which every doctor will know that medicines have been discovered on one side and they're very good, but the other side, they can be poison, and they can be poison to individuals, even though they're good for most people. So all you have to do is listen to the side effects of any pharmaceutical that's being advertised on television, and you know exactly what I mean, that this pharmaceutical may be good for you, but oh, by the way, it could kill you. And that's how medicine has developed over the ages. Is doctors tried things, and some things worked and some things not so much. But eventually the two snakes meet at the top and create a strong body. And in most cases now, after millennia of trial and error, we have medicine that works for us, for the most part. And thank God for that. We now have a life expectancy of 90 to 100 years, for most people. I mean, there are many who don't get that far, because they destroy their bodies one way or another, either by drugs or alcohol, or simply by taking themselves out of the game. But if you follow the science, you'll know that we survive, and that you can go on to live to be 90 or 100. My mother-in-law is working on hitting 93 this year, and she's still going pretty strong. She has problems with her vision and her hearing, but she can walk, and she walks better than my wife and I do. And so naturally we can live a long time. But back at the time of Stonehenge, for example, the average life expectancy in the tribe was 20 years. And where I lived in Kodiak, Alaska, women who reached 30 were considered old and of no use to the tribe any longer. And so they would jump off of Old Woman Mountain into what is today the harbor at Kodiak. And so that was called Old Woman Mountain for that reason. So Vincent said, is being aware of the dark side enough, or do we have to embody it? I guess that's a compound question. My answer to the compound question is yes. In other words, it can be enough. You don't have to physically become a bad actor in life, and yet you do have to bring it into your body and understand what it means. And so there's no perfect. We all have our dark side. We all have to cope with our dark side one way or another. Some people have to go talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help them with that. But in my experience over the last over 30 years, I've found that reading Jung's books alert me to the things I need to be aware of in my life. And it's helped quite a lot. And so as I read this story, which is a fantasy, of course, but fantasies are real. Okay. In other words, people who claim that the unconscious or dreams are not real are simply ignorant, okay, because they are quite real and they have meaning, and and we need to, if possible, interpret them. The problem that we have is that our brains learn to communicate with us in pictures because we think in pictures. And, just think about it. Everything that you do, you think in pictures. I mean, even if you're reading a book, which is quite logosy because you're being brought down a certain track of words, and that's very logos oriented, but it doesn't really mean anything to you unless you see the pictures that the author is trying to evoke. And so, yes, Michelle, we are now on page 196, if you want to join me. And you're muted, so in order for us to hear you, we need you to.
Hi.
Sorry,
I'm late.
That's all right. Thank you for joining me.
So page 196.
196, and I'm going to begin a paragraph called "A Wreath of Fire Shines Around the Stone." Okay, so what we've had is this fantasy where Jung imagines two snakes. One is white and one is black, and the two snakes fight. And what happens in this particular fantasy is that the black snake starts to turn a little white. Okay. And we're going to see that in our current events in the coming week, because it's going to be very interesting to see just how many people come out in New York City and what they do. And if we have a repeat of January 6th, then the fight is really still on. But if what happens is that it's sort of a dud of a demonstration and there are only a few people that come out, then we know that the black snake is starting to turn white a bit. And I'm speaking in metaphor, but I think everybody gets what I mean. And I don't make any secret about my own politics. So, you take it for what it's worth. But all of us have these two snakes in us. And it seems to me that the dark snake in many Americans is going to start to turn white necessarily. But at the same time, I turn a little dark in my aspect of my white snake, because I do understand what the people that follow our former president are upset about. Okay, their upset is certainly legitimate, and we have failed to understand these things, and the sooner we start to understand them, the better off we will be. And so anyway, what you missed, the white and black.
I would just love to comment on the duality.
Please.
Well, I've battled with PTSD ever since I'm in my 20s. I'm almost 40 now, and it's I've seen it silently destroy loads of people and their families, and myself included. It sets people on a self-sabotage road. But they've recently developed this amazing lady called Marsha Lindman.
I'm sorry, Michelle. I'm having problems with my connectivity, and so you froze for about 30 to 45 seconds, and we missed everything that you said. So will you start over again, please?
Well, I was talking about what I witnessed in my life as being former military and coming from a military family,
Right.
PTSD. And recently there's this new treatment. I know we're not supposed to like talk about um, psychological things, but it's all about duality,
Well, no,
about
no, that's not
acceptance.
the case. Let me correct you.
Yeah.
Everything about this YouTube channel is about psychology. Okay.
Oh,
My only caveat is that I am not a mental health professional. Sometimes I have mental health professionals online, but we are in general laymen here. And so we can give our ideas, our opinion, whatever it is, but we're not interpreting other people's dreams. You can speak of your own dreams, but I will not interpret them. Okay.
Oh, okay.
You
Well,
can
thank you
interpret them.
for the
You
clarification.
you can interpret your dreams, you can interpret your visions, but I will not interpret them. Okay, because
Okay.
that's the job of a psychologist. Okay.
Hmm.
So, but go ahead.
But it's just a very interesting way of looking at things, and it's not necessarily agreeing or accepting, it's giving space to the other side, the complete other side
Yep.
of what you think is right. And it's not easy for me, when I initially hear the complete opposite side, I do have an emotional reaction. And, apparently that makes me an emotional person, but I'm human, and I've just
Well, we're all
learned that
emotional persons, but go ahead.
yeah, and I just know that in that moment to not react and to let it sink into to developing a more formal opinion.
Mhm.
But that's just where I'm at in my growth, and apparently I'm not the only one that needs help hearing the complete other side. So
Yeah,
I'll pass with that.
okay. I'm not sure we have to hear the complete other side, but let me give you an example. A couple of years back, one of my followers in the advanced reading group, I won't identify, but she was a woman and she was railing against the patriarchy. And she was talking about, the people that follow our former president. And she says, why can't they see what the right way is? Why are they being the way they are? And, I think they're un-American, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, wait a minute. Those guys are the salt of the earth. Okay. Those guys are the men that kept me alive in Vietnam. Okay. Those were the people that did it. And so it's not all black and white. The point is, you have to see, where are they coming from? Well, where they're coming from is that in the last 40 to 50 years, we sent their jobs overseas. Okay, I'll just wait until Michelle can connect audio again. Okay, so in the last 40 years, we sent their jobs overseas. Okay, and so when we talk about the Rust Belt, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, boy, that was a great place to live in the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s. But what we did was, and I'm guilty of this personally, sure. We sent their jobs overseas, and so they were left high and dry, and they were a little bit older, and they no longer had a way to support themselves, and life didn't favor them. I'll tell you how it came up in my life specifically, which was I was in the medical transcription business. Now, what that means is the typing of medical records. If you go to the hospital, the doctor has to dictate several times. He has to dictate a history and physical before they even start doing anything, where he or she talks about what the condition of the patient is, that sort of thing. Then there's often an operative note where the doctor operates and describes exactly what they did step by step in this particular operation, and anything that they had difficulty with. For example, if they intubate you, which means they put a tube down your throat so that they can keep you breathing when you're unconscious, that's usually done very simply, but let's say in 5% of the cases, intubation is a problem. And the result is that something unexpected happens during intubation, and that has to be dictated by the doctor. The doctor has to own up to that immediately after the surgery. And because obviously there are 5 other people in the room and they all saw what happened, right? So you can't not recognize it. And then also, every time the doctor meets with you, he or she has to dictate a meeting note, a note about what happened in this meeting. And at the end of your hospital stay, the doctor has to dictate a discharge summary, a summary of what happened during the whole course of your time. Now, they've automated this quite a lot since when I started. So there's a move in that direction, including in AI, but AI is way less than what we think it is still. Okay. And so what happened was, over the years of the 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of women who could only work at home became medical transcriptionists, and they received their work at home. They typed up these notes, and then they returned them to the hospital. This used to be done manually, but in the age of digitization, then it became on computers. So when I started, it was tape recorders, but ultimately it got to the point where we could take the dictation off the machine, send it to India, have it typed there, and come back. And so what happened to a lot of those women was that they were comfortably going along typing medical notes, and it's a production process, obviously, just like a factory. They're producing these documents for medical records, and all of a sudden that work went away, or it changed. They had to change in order for them to stay in the industry. Now, what also happened was those women tended to find better things to do. So at one point, I did advertise for medical transcriptionists in the United States, and I didn't get any applications, none. And so, but what I did was I moved much of the industry to India. And it became, because of artificial intelligence can't understand you. If you have Alexa, you know that Alexa often makes mistakes and doesn't hear the right thing when you say what you wanted to put on your shopping list, right? Well, you get that in medical language, and it just gets crazy. Okay. And so for the Indians, it became an editing process rather than a raw typing process. But the essence of what happened was that medical transcription job that used to be in the hospital, it was very often in the basement of the hospital next to the morgue. There'd be 20 or 30 women who were typing medical transcription very often. And then it gradually moved away from the hospital to homes. And finally, it moved to India. Okay, and that's the company that I founded and ultimately took public and made the largest company in our industry at that time. Okay, I got into a lot of other things like electronic health records in general, but that was the origin of my business. And so some of those women who were typing at home and everything was hunky-dory for 15 or 20 years, and all of a sudden that job went away at home and they had to change or else, they were quite resentful. Okay, some of them were quite resentful. And because they were in their maybe 50s or 60s by the time that happened, they found it difficult to retool themselves. And so, they're rightfully resentful. Okay, but at the same time, all of us have to retool ourselves, reinvent ourselves. I've reinvented myself many times, and I'm fortunate that I have not only a broad education, but a lot of experience around the world. So I can call on an incredible number of assets that are in my own experience and consciousness to decide what I'm going to do on a day-to-day basis. Now, by 2010, that became a website, which is the Archetype in Action website. And by 2016, that became this YouTube channel. I'm still doing it. The confluence process that we're doing is literally an evolution of culture and society. It cannot be done by saying, well, we've got to have this, and if we just have this in our culture, then everything will be hunky-dory. Okay, like we have to have religion. Well, no, we don't. Okay, we don't have to have what has been known as organized religion. It works for some people. It's wonderful for some people. God bless them. May they succeed. And I wish everyone well for Palm Sunday today. But at the same time, it left a lot of people cold, including me, because the scientific method over 500 years since Martin Luther attacked the bases of religion and said, this is not real. Okay. And so they would say, there's no God up there. We can see through this telescope. And this is the problem that Galileo got in, because Galileo could look through his telescope and he could see the moons of Jupiter. And he could say, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. And so the abjuration of Galileo Galilei is him being called up before the Inquisition, and he had to literally swear on a Bible that the sun revolves around the earth. Okay, he did, and he did that. Why did he do that? Why did he kneel in front of the Inquisitor and put his hand on the Bible and swear that? Because he knew that the Catholics kept good records and he would make monkeys of them for all time. Okay. And so his penalty was And he was already almost blind by this time. He was 70 years old when that happened. And he was almost blind. And his penalty was he could never look through a telescope again. And he could never do something else. And he had to live in sort of parole confinement. Think of it that way. Something like not as wonderfully as Pope Benedict, but that sort of thing. And so when he had those penalties, he lived another 4 years. He invented two more sciences, one of which was quantum physics. So anyway, Michelle, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. I just wanted to share on just when you were talking, it just brought so many things up to my mind, and my own road with religion, and I always tried to make myself a believer, but I never could. I thought doing the rituals, if I did it enough, perfectly enough, and I just wasn't, I'm a sinner. I'm not doing it good enough. That's why I'm having these internal problems. So try harder, try harder. And just the process of change, and for me, it takes pain to change. Like, I
Obviously.
need pain, and then the pain and the messiness just makes it more painful. And it is painful and messy, and it's ungraceful, and it's just, I hate it, but when you're on the other side, I look back and I'm like, it was worth it. But when I'm going through it, I am just like, why am I so close? Like, the judgments.
Right.
But
And so, you know, for Christianity, for thousands of years, the idea of faith was enough. Okay. And pastors and priests learned what to say and what to do to move people along. Okay. And as most people know, you might not know, on her 22nd birthday, my middle daughter had dinner with me, just privately, the two of us. And she had been in Russia for a year and a half. And after we had a lovely dinner for 3 hours, the last thing she said to me was, "Dad, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell." Okay. And boy, that hit me like a ton of bricks. And on my way home that night, I had a vision of Mephistopheles appear in my car. And I accepted the Faustian bargain on this condition: you can have my immortal soul at my death, on condition that my daughters don't think that of me for the rest of my life. And so it's been a very delicate subject between me and my daughter. We have a close relationship, but Mephistopheles has kept his promise, that maybe my daughter changed too. But it took me, because I had that vision and it was quite real, and I know that if it had happened to other people, it could easily have caused a traffic accident and killed me. But if it happened in the last 500 years, when pastors sermonize about fire and brimstone, I'm sure a lot of people had visions and dreams about fire and brimstone, and that made them believers and made them come to the faith. In my case, because I had studied Jungian psychology for over a decade at that point, I knew that it was a vision. Okay, I knew that it wasn't a physical thing. I knew that Mephistopheles sitting in my car for that 5-second period, it didn't take more than 5 seconds. But I knew that that was both real, but it was coming from me. Okay, I knew both those things. But I was definitely in hell. I dropped into hell at that time. And it took me 10 years to work my way out, or nearly 10 years. And the thing that pulled me out of it was when I saw Jung on the YouTube video. There's like a 1.5-minute segment in which Jung is asked whether he believes in God. And he said, well, very complicated, but I have no need to believe. I know. And that really hit me right between the eyeballs, just boom, because I said to myself at that moment when I saw that video, I know too. And so then I had to work out over a decade's time, what is it that I know? Okay, and so now what I know is that, yeah, every word of the Bible is true. I accept that. But I also accept that every word of the Quran is true, and every word of the Bhagavad Gita is true, and they're all true. Okay, and I now can step beyond religion, as the Dalai Lama talks about, and look back at it and say, you know, they're all true, and they all work for some people very well. And there are a few people that they don't work for at all. Okay. And, you know, I can see how they work for people. In other words, when I christened my eldest grandson at my church, you know, he's 19 now, so it was 19 years ago. I was holding him in my arms and walking around the church, introducing him to the congregation. And I saw light in the faces of the members of the congregation, which was totally inspiring. Okay. So if I didn't, so I have no need to believe. I saw it. Okay. I know it's there. I know that Mephistopheles exists. They all are inside me. Okay. And they all are inside God as we define that in Jungian psychology, which is the unconscious. And it's both the individual unconscious, so each of us has our own God, and in the collective unconscious, God the Father, who made the heavens and the earth. Well, yeah, he made everything. And so God, in the collective unconscious sense, is all of us, all 7-8 billion of us. And what we see evolving psychologically is, what are we going to be and think in the next 2,000 years, in this age of Aquarius, the Aquarian age? It's not going to be exactly like Christianity came along in the last time, in the time of Pisces, with the duality. It's going to be rather a unity. We're going to have to see, we're going to all have to see that we all live on the pale blue dot, and that everything that ever happened to any human being anywhere in the world going back to our ancestors who were single-celled organisms, everything happened on that pale blue dot. Okay. And so we have to understand how small we are in terms of the meaning of the universe and so on. So anyway, Michelle, I've talked a long time. You go ahead. I'll look at some chats from
Okay.
YouTube.
Well, thank you for sharing. And jumping from religion and trying to make work what you see what works or other people say works, and then finding your own, you know, it's a leap. It's a leap of, I don't know, something. And it was very, very hard for me.
Well, it's hard for everyone because we're all programmed in a certain way by our parents and by our society to believe a certain thing. And you get to a point where you say, wait a minute, I don't see that. And then you have to make the leap. You have to take the step and see it.
Yeah, and for me, I came to a point early in COVID where I just was out of ideas on my own. I've tried them all, got the same result or worse every time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had come across somebody who had 30, I think at the time, 37 years of recovery, not only in the drinking program, but there's another program for sugar. And
Mm-hmm.
sugar is very addictive.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very addictive to me. And I know some people can be like, how can that destroy your sanity? It doesn't take much for a foothold
Yep.
for if you have an addictive personality.
Yep.
Yeah, or issues of that sort. And so I called this guy and was like, how can you do it? It's hard enough to do one program. How are you doing both and not being miserable? Because there's that too. How are you not doing it miserable and just like you can, just pick on the little guy or, feel superior to them and be like, oh, your problems are so easy.
Well, they're not. They're not
Yeah,
because you're,
not to
yeah.
them, but because
Right.
you're older, you're like, oh, that was easy. Um, and he was just like, you need to find something bigger than yourself. What is it to you that's bigger than yourself that drives you insane? And at the time, I was so unmanageable. The laundry in my house had it just would get to me and it would pile up and he was like, you can make that your higher power, work with that. And I'm like, you're insane.
Yeah.
And that's where I started with something bigger than myself. And it just unraveled a whole new direction for me.
Yeah. Believe me, I know because I did my taxes yesterday and laundry was your thing. Doing my taxes is my thing. And mind you, I went to law school and had honors with distinction in my 2 semesters of federal taxation. So it's not because the law is difficult. It's because I actually detest doing that kind of work.
Yeah,
So
it's like a visceral.
yeah, and it was so hard to do that last night, but I finally finished at midnight. And um, what what really ripped me was that half of the time was trying to get my now 20-year account with TurboTax straightened out so that I could use the damn program.
Oh, you had to prove you're not a robot.
Yeah, I mean, and boy, it just is incredible. I mean, they're very careful about making sure you're you, right? But but it was like, getting out of the penitentiary to after my taxes had been accepted, to get the program to accept that I was me. And it took like half an hour of saying, yes, I'm me, and yes, here's my number again. And I had to put in my driver's license number like 3 or 4 different times, and my wife's. And it just really irritating. But anyway, I mean, some people love to do that stuff, and I'm not that person. Um,
I would consider that a spiritual battle.
it was a spiritual battle, absolutely. And I came out of my study here, and my wife wanted to challenge my work on the taxes, and I said, could we be done with this for tonight? Because I hadn't sent her a copy of the taxes yet, and I signed her name electronically to it. And it's not that she would have made any changes, because she doesn't have a clue about doing taxes at this depth and level. But so she wouldn't change it. She just wanted the tax return on her computer. And I still haven't sent it to her, but anyway, she'll get it today before we watch the championship game of women's basketball. I don't watch many games, but the game between Iowa and South Carolina on Friday night was a thing to behold. It was just beautiful. Okay. And I really look forward to the final game today between LSU and Iowa, because both of them have terrific players. And I think that Iowa's in the bubble, and so I'm going to say that they're going to win. But I might be wrong. Who knows? But that's my guess. So anyway, Mila, welcome. And where are you? You're in Arizona now, or?
No, I'm still in New York City. I
Oh,
was
that's
in DC and
oh, that's right. And you have a picture of Arizona behind you or something. It's all that cactus.
it's actually my dream to someday go to Stanford University. So that's actually the Stanford University campus in my background.
Oh, cool. Well,
Yeah.
Stanford would be a great place. Tim and I visited the campus last year because they have a sculpture garden of Auguste Rodin at Stanford. And it was really a moving experience for me to go there with Tim, who is a Rodin sort of sculptor. And so anyway, I'm going to negotiate with my colleagues this week in preparation for our confluence, where we all will become sculptors, and to include possibly the creation of mobiles in the style of Calder. And so it's something I'm going to possibly do with my students. I'm working up to that.
Hopefully nothing happens, like in Florida with that principal. What was that, like a week ago or two?
Yeah, did what?
I didn't really catch the article, but it was something about like some professor in Florida getting fired because of like talking about or taking, well, I don't think he took the children to Florence, Italy, but I think it might
Oh,
have,
they showed him that. Yeah, they showed David. he showed a picture of David.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, people who do that have to get a life. My God. You know,
Well, how old were they, the students?
I have no idea, but you know, the human body can't be a secret at any age, really.
Here in New York City, we learn reproductive. Well, when I was in junior high school, like around 8th grade, so I was like what 13. So when you're like around 13, 14 in New York City, unless they changed it, we learn about like reproduction, how babies are made. So obviously we see like the body parts of the reproductive organs, but which is a little bit more explicit than just
Yeah.
sculpture.
Well, and right. And, in my day, when I was in the 8th grade, they separated the boys and the girls, and they probably showed that to the girls, but they never showed any of that to the boys. They never showed us what it was about. And we had to rely on either our friends or our fathers to tell us what it was about. But the school wouldn't do it with the boys, only the girls. And I remember that quite clearly, and feeling kind of left out when the girls went to the separate health class, and we didn't know what they were studying. Big deal.
Well,
Anyway.
in my time, I learned from Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and now we learn from porn stars. What can I say? Good Lord. Anyway, I guess I should go on with this reading. So we're in resolution. We've had and by the way, Amila, thank you for all your comments on the YouTube channel chat. I'm intentionally not rereading them because everybody can read them for themselves, and what you say makes a lot of sense, but I'm going to go on with the reading here. Okay, so we've had the fantasy of the fight between the two snakes here, and Jung realizing that the black snake in the course of the fight has turned a bit white. Okay, later figures out that both snakes turn to the other color, start to get to the other color. But in this passage, it was only the black snake started to turn white, and in his vision. And so I'm going to read on. A wreath of fire shines around the stone. I am seized with fear at what I see. The coarse peasant's boot, the foot of a giant that crushes an entire city. I see the cross, the removal of the cross, the mourning. How agonizing this sight is. No longer do I yearn. I see the divine child, while the white serpent with the white serpent in his right hand and the black serpent in his left hand. I see the green mountain, the cross of Christ on it, and a stream of blood flowing from the summit of the mountain. I can look no longer. It is unbearable. I see the cross and Christ on it in his last hour and torment. At the foot of the cross, the black serpent coils itself. It was wound itself around my feet, or it has wound itself around my feet. I am held fast, and I spread my arms wide. Salome draws near. The serpent has wound itself around my whole body, and my countenance is that of a lion. Okay, so what has happened in this one paragraph is that Jung has, first of all, started to have some of the visions that he was having pre-World War One. And so this vision that he had on Christmas Day, 1913, which was exactly 7 months and a week before the beginning of World War One, was one of these visions, a prefiguration of World War One. And he actually had 12 of these dreams and visions, which he's already talked about in the earlier parts of the Red Book. This is one of them, the peasant's boot, and the giant that crushes an entire city. That is one of them. And so he doesn't know yet whether he's going crazy. Okay. He thinks he might be. And that's why when August the 1st, 1914 came around and the Guns of August began, and war was declared, he said he was the happiest man on earth on that day, because he realized then that he had been connected with the collective unconscious, and he was seeing, he actually saw the idea of collective unconscious at that time. And he's later asked in his 1955 interview, what was the biggest innovation of his life? And he said, oh, that was the collective unconscious, recognizing that it existed and how powerful it is. And so this is the time in his life where he's actually experiencing it. And, it must have been quite overpowering even to a psychiatrist to see those visions and not really appreciate what they meant until the war broke out. And then he realized that that's what was happening. Now, also, in the same paragraph, he's seeing himself as Abraxas. Okay, the image that's on the cover of Ion is this image of which is an ancient Mithraic image of Abraxas with a snake curling around and coming up the body, a human body, and having a head of a lion. And so that God, that most powerful of gods, Abraxas, is first alluded to here. He no doubt got it from early Mithraic writings and images that he probably had seen at that time, but he's seeing that happening to him, and he's seeing himself on the cross and the snake enveloping him and coming up from the base of the cross and completely surrounding him. So he's being having the life squeezed out of him and so on. So this is a very powerful moment in his life. And so I think I will read this paragraph once again, since I've now alerted the YouTube audience to its importance. And now you can hear it in the context of that importance. A wreath of fire shines around the stone. I am seized with fear at what I see. The coarse peasant's boot, the foot of a giant that crushes an entire city. I see the cross, the removal of the cross, the mourning. How agonizing the sight is. No longer do I yearn. I see the divine child with the white serpent in his right hand and the black serpent in his left hand. I see the green mountains, the cross of Christ on it, and a stream of blood flowing from the summit of the mountain. I can look no longer. It is unbearable. I see the cross and Christ on it in his last hour and torment. At the foot of the cross, the black serpent coils itself. It has wound itself around my feet. I am held fast, and I spread my arms wide. Salome draws near. The serpent has wound itself around my whole body, and my countenance is that of a lion. Salome says, Mary was the mother of Christ. Do you understand? I see that a terrible and incomprehensible power forces me to imitate the Lord in his final torment. But how can I presume to call Mary my mother? Salome, you are Christ. I stand with outstretched arms like someone crucified, my body taut and horribly entwined by the serpent. You, Salome, say that I am Christ? Well, it's interesting that we got to this just at the time in time for Easter week. It is as if I stood alone on a high mountain with stiff outstretched arms. The serpent squeezes my body in its terrible coils, and the blood streams from my body, spilling out down the mountainside. Salome bends down to my feet and wraps her hair, her black hair, around them. She lies thus for a long time. Then she cries, I see light. Truly, she sees, her eyes are open. The serpent falls from my body and lies languidly on the ground. I stride over it and kneel at the feet of the prophet, whose form shines like a flame. Elijah, your work is fulfilled here. Other things will come. Seek untiringly, and above all, write exactly what you see. Salome looks in rapture at the light that streams from the prophet. Elijah transforms into a huge flame of white light. The serpent wraps itself around her foot as if paralyzed. Salome kneels before the light in wonderstruck devotion. Tears fall from my eyes, and I hurry out into the night. Like one who has no part in the glory of the mystery, my feet do not touch the ground of this earth, and it is as if I were melting into air. Okay, so that's the end of that segment. Let's see where these footnotes are. Okay, I'm gonna read these footnotes that are here. Footnote 211, which comes at the time that he's asking Salome, you, Salome, say I am Christ? Okay, so that was the question, and here's the footnote. In the 1925 seminar, Jung recounted that after Salome's declaration that he was Christ, quote, in spite of my objection, she maintained this. I said, this is madness, and became filled with skeptical resistance. This is from Introduction to Jungian Psychology, page 104. He interpreted this event as follows. Salome's approach and her worshiping of me is obviously that side of the inferior function which is surrounded by an aura of evil. One is assailed by the fear that perhaps this is madness. This is how madness begins. This is madness. You cannot get conscious of these unconscious facts without giving yourself to them. If you can overcome your fear of the unconscious and can let yourself go down, then these facts will take on a life of their own. You can be gripped by these ideas so much that you really go mad, or nearly so. These images were so much reality that they recommend themselves in such extraordinary meaning that one is caught. They form part of the ancient mysteries. In fact, it is such fantasies that made the mysteries. Compare the mysteries of Isis as told in Annapolis with the initiation and deification of the initiate, One gets a peculiar feeling from being put through such an initiation. The important part that led up to the deification was the snake encoiling of me, snakes encoiling of me. Salome's performance was deification. The animal face, which I felt mine transformed into, was the famous Deus, Lantocephalus, of the Mithraic mysteries, the figure which is represented with a snake coiled around the man, the snake's head resting on the man's head, and the face of the man, that is, of a lion. In this deification mystery, you make yourself into the vessel and are a vessel of creation in which the opposites reconcile. He added, all this is Mithraic symbolism from beginning to end. Ibid, page 105 to 108. In the Golden Ass, Lucian undergoes an initiation into the mysteries of Isis. The significance of this episode is that it is the only direct description of such an initiation that has survived. Of the event itself, Lucian states, and this in italics, I approached the very gates of death and set foot on Prosperine's threshold, yet was permitted to return, wrapped through all the elements. At midnight, I saw the sun shining as if it were noon. I entered the presence of the gods of the underworld, and the gods I sought, and the gods of the upper world stood near and worshiped them. After this, he was presented on a pulpit in the temple in front of a crowd. He wore garments that included designs of serpents and winged lions, held a torch, and wore a palm tree chaplet with its leaves sticking all out like rays of light. That's from The Golden Ass by R. Graves, Penguin, 1984, page 241. Jung's copy of the German translation of this work has a line in the margin by this passage. Let's see. Okay, there's one more footnote that applies. Footnote 212. On the Psychology of the Kore Figure, 1951, Jung described these episodes as follows, quote, in the underground house, actually in the underworld, there lives an old magician and prophet with his daughter. She is, however, not really his daughter. She is a dancer, a very loose person who is blind and seeks healing. Now that's from Collected Works 9-1, paragraph 360. This description of Elijah draws him together with the later description of Philemon. Jung noted this shows that an unknown woman is a mythological figure in the beyond that means in the unconscious. She is soror, meaning sister, or filia mystica, the mystical woman, I guess, of a hierophant or philosopher, evidently a parallel to those mystic syzygies which are to be met with in the figures of Simon Magus and Helen, Zosimus and Theosebia, Homerius and Cleopatra, etc. Our dream figure fits in best with Helen. Ibid, paragraph 372. Okay, comments?
Oh, I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm still very new to like learning the symbolism, but I've been reading Robert Jordan's books. I think they're based on Jung. but he said that often,
I have a comment, and then
oh,
nothing else. So could you say it again?
oh, but he was saying that often the self can come to us as a vision of an older man and a woman, and they both represent the self.
Yeah. They're
Well,
both
that's all
in,
I have.
yeah, they're both in the self. Um, they're both parts of it. And, um, in part, Jung was saying that Eros is blind, okay, which is Eros is represented by Salome, and Elijah or Philemon later on represents wisdom. But in this passage now, Salome gains sight, okay, and so she's starting to come from the other side and gain her wisdom also. Okay, this passage is so important because it's showing how in Jung's own psyche, he's experiencing this transition point where he's recognizing the opposites and recognizing that they're changing. The snakes are changing color. Salome gains vision, gains sight. She sees light suddenly, whereas she was blind before. And so, there's a sharing, and
I
they
have a question.
go ahead.
So when the two snakes, there's a black snake and a white snake, right?
Right.
So what does that represent? Like one snake is for the daytime, the other snake is for the nighttime. Like what is it, like the anima and animus?
Well,
Or
the answer to that question is yes, it's all of those. Okay. And the point of it, I mean, the snakes represent all duality, okay, just as they do in the caduceus. Okay, they represent in the caduceus, which is the symbol of medicine, they represent the opposites. And, medicine is good right up to the time that it's not, which you hear about at the end of every pharmaceutical ad when they say, well, our medicine is wonderful, but oh, by the way, you can die from it. and so this is in our world all the time. And so we have to see in our world where that things are not all black and white, that they do change, that people do go beyond them. Okay. And so, if 9/16, January 6th, was the apogee of the dark side of America, the shadow side of America coming forth and literally attacking our Central Park, murdering people, and so on. That was the apogee, the very worst case that we have gotten to so far. Okay, I'm not saying it can't happen again, but then what we are going to see in the coming week is the recovery from the apogee. Okay, I'm not expecting to see a January 6th type of attack again. I would be very surprised, partially because we've locked up 1,000 people who were in the January 6th deal. And so I'm not expecting to see, huge crowds. Okay. And We may see a few protesters who get out on the streets of New York, but I would be very surprised to see riots in the streets and that sort of thing. There may be some dust-ups, but what that will be symbolically is the black snake, which had its apogee, its highest point in 1/6. That black snake is starting to change now. And so people who were carried away by 1/6 are having second thoughts. And that's the changing of the black snake to the white. And by the same token, my white snake changes to the black because I can look at 1/6 from the point of view of the protesters, and I understand what they're protesting. We had a discussion about that earlier in this session. So, it's absolutely true that we destroyed the income of tens of thousands of people when we moved our manufacturing overseas, and that was not well thought out.
I feel like the gray area is like everyone else in DC that's like coming home from work or like going on their lunch break during the January
Right.
catastrophe. That's like the gray area.
Right. But right now, let's say China, Russia, and certainly China are being demonized, and so they represent the black snake. But I had a midshipman approach me one time, Annapolis midshipman, saying to me, "Well, Skip, we even if we have 5 aircraft carriers in the Taiwan Strait, that's only 500 jets or airplanes, and the Chinese can put up 3,000 jet fighters against us, and from the land, and that's going to be very hard." And I said, "Well, what you have to know is that if the Chinese were to choose to do that, they would destroy their own economy. They would commit suicide, basically, because we currently owe them, I don't know, $2 or $3 trillion in national debt in the form of bonds. And we've moved a lot of our manufacturing to China. And so if we were to go to war with China, about $1 trillion a year worth of revenue for the Chinese economy would be gone in an instant. And if that were to happen, the Chinese economy would just collapse. And so I'm sure that the Chinese leaders know this, and our leaders know this. And so, there can be lots of bluster around the edges, and that goes on all the time. I mean, I was briefed on the types of things that are happening today. Back in my service days, which was before 1991, before 1990, when I broke my leg, that was the end of my military career. But during my military career, I was trained in Mandarin Chinese because we thought China could be the enemy. And these confrontations that we hear about Chinese coming dangerously close to our airplanes, that sort of thing, that happens every day. I mean, that sort of thing happens every day, and it's just part of the game that the militaries play. And sometimes that we make a mistake, and that can lead to something like the Pueblo incident, or it can knock an airplane out of the sky or something like that. So, but that doesn't mean we're going to war. It just means somebody made human error out there. And And
It's so amazing, like how we went from like living in caves, painting inside the caves, to like, oh my gosh, look, it's another tribe. Oh wow, hello tribe. And then you have like hundreds of tribes. And then
right.
you have China that has like thousands of tribes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And China just keeps stacking itself up with like Hong Kong and Macau and Taiwan, and it's like we're not letting go. And now they're like in the South China Sea, and like we need fish, we have so many people. It's like having a minivan and saying like, yeah, everybody can fit, but really they can't. So everyone's sort of like in the van, on top of the van, hanging onto the back of
Right.
the van.
Yeah. And our world has set itself up in such a way that there can be huge catastrophes. I mean, the Ganges River has been dammed by the Chinese at 17 locations up above India. Okay, 17 dams in the Ganges, and the Ganges provides water for a quarter of the Indian population, so 250 million people. And so if China wanted to, it could shut off the water for India. But, if 250 million people didn't have enough water, what do you think will happen? Well, it wouldn't be good, right? And so, that's the level of catastrophe that human beings can bring down on themselves if we're not fully conscious of who we are and what we are doing to one another. And so, even at the Naval Academy, that young man who spoke to me, he didn't understand this economic issue that I just said. I said, don't worry about that. If they, we're not going to go to war with China. We're not. And it's only some crazy person who would do that. And, I remember before he came into office, there was a Newsweek cover, and it showed the former president on one of these toddler rides, which was a jet fighter, and it had a red button on it, a big red button that the toddler can bang on, right? And this is what he learned. It's not that people are set up against him so that he can fail, but there are literally thousands of people in our government who know better and won't let anybody, even a toddler, push a red button. Okay. Before he went into office, he said, why shouldn't we use nuclear weapons? We can use nuclear weapons. We have them. Why don't we use them? Well, if somebody uses one, you're going to find out why we shouldn't, right? And will Putin do that? I think it's very unlikely. Okay, because for one thing, the wind blows to the east. So if he sets off a nuclear catastrophe, as he might in that nuclear power plant in eastern Ukraine, the fallout's going to come to Russia mainly. Okay, and he knows that, and we have to remember in orders of magnitude that the entire economy of Russia is equivalent to Italy. Okay, they have as many people as we have, and they have the largest country in the world, but their economy is the size of Italy. Okay, so many Russians are living in poverty to this day and always have been. Um, and, one wag said, well, Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons. And that's what it is. Basically, it's a source of fossil fuels, gas and oil. But that's it. They don't really have any economy beyond that, other than what the oligarchs have figured out, and they kept it all for themselves. So you have all these Russian oligarchs running around sailing billion-dollar yachts type thing. But they haven't shared that with the Russian people. And sooner or later, the Russian people are going to get wise. And a lot of them have and have left the country, right? And
A lot of Russians are coming to Montenegro, my mother's homeland.
yeah. Well, a
And
lot of Russians are coming everywhere. I mean, we have a lot of Russians on Long Island now, right? And a lot of them live in Trump Tower. But
some of the Chinese people in Montenegro that have been there for like 1,000 years since like Marco Polo, they're like,
right,
what the hell are you doing here? That's not how it works.
right, exactly.
But immigration, like, forget about immigration. That's not how it works.
Right,
Oh,
right.
I just
Michelle, go ahead.
I would just like to add, like I think one part of the human mind, like we all know this, and like, humans, we all have a heart, even the most evil person, wants to think good of themselves.
Right,
And, you know, it's a very natural human response after trauma to seek control. So
sure,
these people in power, they've been traumatized. That's all they know is trauma and passing that on. And it's all about seeking control.
sure,
So I see it more as a battle of the fear, the unconscious desire to prevent anything bad from happening by
right.
doing all the bad yourself, I guess. I don't know.
Oh,
So
sure.
that's just
And so, Putin is traumatized. Okay, he became a professional KGB agent, and he saw his country collapse. Okay, USSR collapse, and that must have been really traumatic. Okay, it would be like me.
And followed by all of those, like the terrorist attacks and the mafias and all that corruption that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, he thinks in a simplistic way that he can just take Ukraine back. Well, what he doesn't understand, and which is very well depicted in this movie called Mr. Jones. If you've not seen it, see this movie. It was made in 2019. It's called Mr. Jones. And it's about what Stalin, and it has two parallel tracks. One track is George Orwell writing Animal Farm, and one track is this British journalist who goes into Ukraine in the early 1930s to figure out what is the magic of Stalin. Okay, because supposedly Stalin's story was that his 5-year plan was working perfectly and everything was prosperous, and so everybody wondered what was Stalin's gold. Okay, that's how they referred to it. What is Stalin's gold? How is he making his economy work?
Wisdom. Didn't he have like so many resourceful philosophers and thinkers around him?
Well, sure, but Stalin's gold was actually the wheat of Ukraine, and what he was doing was he was starving the Ukrainians to death. He was taking all of their wheat that was being produced in those huge fields across Ukraine, and he was shipping it to Russia. And so the Russians were very prosperous, but they were prosperous because they had the wheat of Ukraine. And so the Ukrainians were actually reduced to cannibalism. Okay. And I've known that
revolution.
Yeah, and I've known that since I was in college 50 years ago, that, Stalin starved the Ukrainians, and this is actually depicted in this movie, okay, in a very subtle way, where this guy is he's the journalist, and he's in a family home, and everybody seems fairly healthy, and he asks them, well, how are you so healthy when everybody else is starving? And a teenage girl says to him, well, our brother feeds us. And then the next scene shows a cadaver that's out in the yard, and they're literally eating their brother.
It reminds me of Kim Jong-un, who came out to the North Korean people as like, I eat a bowl of rice every day, and you see how healthy I am, you can do it too. But then so many diplomats complained that wasn't the reality of the situation, because they would go and have dinner with him and he would eat caviar, and and people were like, this is horrible.
Right. So I always remember our former president, how he cultivated this frown, this look, which is very much like the look of Mussolini had. He cultivated that, obviously, because the parallels to our former president and Mussolini's frown are absolute. Okay, except he didn't read the history well enough, because Mussolini and his wife got hung up by their heels and murdered in a gas station. Okay, they were hung by their heels and then they were shot. And so, stand by, but I don't want to be a prophet, but I'm pretty sure I know what's going to happen. Wow, there's a member of the family. Holy smokes, Michelle, he's as big as you are.
Yes, this is Marco.
Yeah, hi, Marco. Yeah, the interesting thing you raised, Marco Polo. Marco Polo made his way all the way to Hangzhou in China. And when he visited Hangzhou, it was the largest city in the world. Okay. When Marco Polo in the 14th century visited Hangzhou, it had 1 million people. And the interesting fact is that when I visited Hangzhou in 1995 or so, let's say it was 95. It was in that era that I visited Hangzhou. When I visited Hangzhou, it must have been 85. I went there. That's right, 85. But Hangzhou still had 1 million people. 1 million. It hadn't increased in 700 years in size. And my impression of all the people in Mao jackets riding bicycles was, wow, the Mandarins are still here. The horrible bureaucrats that had run the Qing dynasty were called the Mandarins, right? And it was very clear that the bureaucracy has started to call itself communist, but it's still very much there. And you very much you very much see that in the current Chinese administration. That the Mandarins are still there, and whereas
I feel like, oh, sorry.
well, we still have our cowboys, but go ahead.
No, I just the taverns. Well, I going back to what Michelle was saying about trauma, I feel like maybe possibly Jung was, kind of like under so much pressure because he had Freud and then he had his peers, and he was like, Jung was filled with his own ideas and he was very ambitious, and he he he's so respectable because he wasn't a competitive man. He was very just open to learning. He
Right.
wasn't egocentric where he was asserting himself and going through a power struggle. And he was very confident in that he was a student of life, and just learning as much as he can from life and himself. And so during that time of World War I, I cannot even imagine how terrified he must have been, like going into work and then starting his own path, and like going in his own direction with his school of thought and patience and his dreams and journaling and drawing and all these things going on with him. And it's like, I'm absorbing all this information, what about me?
What am I going to do with all this stuff, right? And he said that his red book time was the prima materia, the primary material for a lifetime of work, more than one lifetime, and it is. And we see more and more coming out of that work. It's just totally productive. And I sort of got tired of the Jungian analyst community just keeping all this stuff to themselves, just in a sort of mutual masturbation type of approach. And that's why I started doing what I started doing back in 2010. I said, I read this line from Man and His Symbols, which says that, we still don't know what to do. And so if any of us know what to do, we should say so and, start doing it. And I'll just read that because I think it's probably one of the most profound things I read in Jungian.
Maybe they're afraid because of that thin line of neurotic and psychotic.
Well, I mean, they're protecting a profession. Okay, but I have here the original hardbound version of Man and His Symbols. And so I'm reading from a part of it on page 101, which is Jung's essay called, which is in an essay called Healing the Split. So you probably can find this if you have a paperback version. It's Healing the Split. And the image that faces it is New York City over
Can't see.
whatever. New York City over Hiroshima. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So Healing the Split. But this paragraph, moved me to do something. And here's what it says. As any change must begin somewhere It is the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. The change must indeed begin with an individual. It might be any one of us. Nobody can afford to look around and to wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself. But since nobody seems to know what to do, it might be worthwhile for each of us to ask himself whether by any chance his or her unconscious may know something that will help us. Certainly the conscious mind seems unable to do anything useful in this respect. Man today is painfully aware of the fact that neither his great religions nor his various philosophies seem to provide him with those powerful animating ideas that would give him the security he needs in the face of the present condition of the world. Okay, so just the part where he says it might be worthwhile for each of us to ask himself whether by any chance his or her unconscious may know something that will help us. And what my unconscious knew was that I was very critical of Jung for not being more vociferous during the run up to World War II and not preventing it. I now reconciled with that by saying, well, there was a hell of a lot going on in Europe at that time. And the Jungian analyst community won't even admit that for a time Jung was dazzled by Hitler. Okay, and this is covered in this play, the Analyst and the Rabbi. And so this is why I played Carl Jung in that play, The Analyst and the Rabbi. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to, it's on this YouTube channel. It's right on the top, so you can't miss it. I urge you to spend an hour watching that play. And, I'm a layman. I have no axe to grind and nothing to gain or lose by playing the part of Jung. But, two Jungian analysts, Murray Stein and Henry Abramovich, wrote this play. And I think it's something that needs to be aired. He had a dark side too, and he made mistakes, and he made a big mistake at that time in the period, let's say 1931 to 1933. He played along with Hitler for a while, and he had his excuses, but nonetheless, he had to recognize that he had made a mistake. And so that's what that play is about, is the recognition that a mistake was made, or maybe more than one probably. But, we all follow the wrong path for one reason or another. And so, that's why, of all the people that were involved in the attack on January 6th, most of the people that were in that crowd went home and said, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen, and went back to their lives. And, that's why I don't expect to see anything big happen in New York. If it does happen, then we will know that the country is still in trouble. But my expectation is that this black snake, which represents all the people who were there on January 6th, some of it will have turned white.
The devil is in the detail, huh?
Yeah.
I don't even think that I don't know for sure because I wasn't there and I wasn't a witness.
Yeah.
But a lot of people did not, at least in Germany itself, a lot of people had no idea what was really happening in World War II, except for the people that were like literally involved, like
Right.
actually, pushing buttons, pulling the trigger, and all the horrible stuff
Yeah.
that
Yeah. I mean,
that was
most of the people were just pulled along by it. I mean, as you rightly say, the people that are in the military, when we're in the military, we don't have any right to say anything politically. This is what Stanley McChrystal didn't understand. He started to make political statements when he was head of Central Command or something, and President Obama brought him back to the White House and said, "You're fired." Basically, he took an hour to do it out of courtesy to McChrystal. But the point
and
is, go ahead.
and it's so dangerous because in during the Second World War there was so much chaos going on all around the world,
Sure.
and all of a sudden Pearl Harbor happened, and uh I think it was Roosevelt. He was the president at the time, right? It was
Yeah.
Franklin Delano.
Yeah.
So the fact that he said that, this is a day which will live in infamy, and then he declared war, and, I mean, it wasn't the best option to, pull off the Manhattan Project in real life, but he really did.
Hmm.
And, I mean, like, that was their only choice at the time. And, it's like horrible. People are capable of doing horrible things to each other, humanity, so
Sure. We surely are that.
um
I spent
but
I spent 8 years in Japan, 3 of it in high school, which was sort of immediately post-war. The Cathedral of Yokohama was still in rubble at that time, and the interesting thing is that many Japanese have said to me that they're glad that Roosevelt used the atom bomb because it ended the war emphatically. And they knew that if the invasion of Japan had occurred, which was the next step after the Battle of Okinawa, that many, many more Japanese would have been killed. And they were making plans for 15-year-old girls to face the American Marines with bamboo spears at that time on the beaches of Japan. I mean, that's how low the country had gotten. And
and you
so,
couldn't even make it alive in the Japanese military. Weren't I don't remember the term for it, but like if you survive a face off with your enemy, you would have to end your own life because
yeah,
that was a sign of defeat. So it's like
it was
a
a sign that you didn't have courage, and so you had to end your own life to show you had courage and honor.
But something that I don't understand, Skip, is what I'm trying to get at is like, you hit me once and I don't do it again, like one slap on the wrist and it's like, okay, no more, like you touch the hot handle and it's like, oh, I'm not touching,
Right,
but
right,
that's why they're chefs.
right. Well,
But
I mean, that works to a degree. It hurts to it works to. This is Adlerian psychology. It works to tell the child a stove is hot, but until he touches the stove, he doesn't know what hot is. But then he does, and he never forgets it, right? And but the problem is the problem after World War I was the Treaty of Versailles, where the Allies treated the Germans in a punitive manner instead of a reconciliatory manner, and so they were naturally resentful. And Jung was seeing the start of World War II in his clinic in 1919. He knew from 1919 that there would be another war. And it was primarily because we treated the Germans in a punitive way. So that was the brilliance of the Marshall Plan, where after World War II, we rebuilt Germany and Japan. We reconstituted them. And they were very grateful. And, you know, I was very surprised the first time I went to Hiroshima, because in the 80s I had business in Hiroshima, and I didn't know how an American would be taken in Hiroshima. But what I found is that the people of Hiroshima are the nicest, sweetest people in all of Japan. And there was no recrimination toward me that I ever was aware of. The one thing that they do ask is that you visit the Peace Museum, which is their museum to the what happened on August 6, 1945. But no recrimination. And, you know, I've thought a lot about that for the rest of my life, for the last 40 years. And the best I can come up with is that the people of Hiroshima had been taken so low, and we came in and rebuilt their society around them and made it possible for them to live. And for that reason, they became eternally grateful. And so they are. The response is gratitude. It's not hate, as I was worried about. Go ahead.
In the mid-90s, there was some kind of a fire in one of the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like 7 years later, both of the Twin Towers just collapsed.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to 1010 Winds from September 11, 2001. And there was a woman calling around like 8 a.m. or something like that, 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. And she's on the phone with no, it was an NPR, it was a National Public, it was 1010 Winds, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1010 Winds, she says, there's a fire on one of the floors. I don't know what's going on. It seems like maybe some kind of spider jet or something flew in there. And at that point, you know, people were just out of panic. And I remember on NPR about 7 years ago, it was like the morning edition, and the news lady was talking about some kind of experiment, like a social experiment that the scientists performed. They had like a square room, and at the corner of every room was a door. And I don't remember if it was a room or a theater, but the point is that it was a little bit dark. Like there were 10 people in there, and everyone was aware that there was a door at every end of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But they put some smoke, they made the room dark, and people were just hysterical. And I think it was only like 2 people that actually managed to go over to the door and get out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And like the majority were just like in the center of the room, just being hysterical.
Yeah.
You know, and my boyfriend, who's a Marine, he says, I tell him, you know, I'm sorry for a second if you can't hear me. There's a woman that's shouting in the middle of the street. And he's like, good for her. That's so healthy. And I'm like, maybe that's what the problem is. Maybe we just have so much emotion in us that we just need to let it all out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, we're entering this Aquarian age, and I want to bring this to a halt. So next week we'll begin with the sentence on page 198, which says, "My longing led me to the overbright day, whose light is the opposite to the dark space of forethinking." And so that's where we'll begin next week. But I'm just going to end this week's session with a shared screen, which I've shared a number of times, and I'll just make it a silent moment for everybody for 30 seconds or so. And it's just demonstrates what we have to think about for the beginning of the Aquarian age. And I hope everybody will give it some thought.